Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Project Flux podcast. On this spotlight session, we have a very, very exciting roundtable because we are joined by the authors of the Digital Transformation in Project Management report, which we covered a few weeks ago on the newsletter. So we've already done our kind of review of it. Really fantastic report, lots of really interesting findings. So today we're very lucky to be joined by three authors of this report. Firstly, we have Dr. Nicholas Dacre, we have Dr. David Baxter, and Dr. Hao Dong. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And we also have, as always, Yoshi with us. How are you, Yoshi?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Very good. And, we have been looking forward to this show for a while, but as they say, the good things come to those who wait. So let's get stuck in. So we're going to change the format slightly from the normal podcast because we've got a few of you on here and we've got a very deliberate kind of agenda of things we want to cover. But before we get into the report itself, we have a bit of a tradition of asking everyone what's on their mind at the moment because the space of AI in project delivery is moving so fast. So if I could ask you all a few questions and just come in with your initial thoughts. And maybe if we start with you, Nicholas, and then we'll move around the table. What are you currently thinking about most when it comes to AI and digital tools in your work or in project management in general?
So I think this is a really interesting question. I was thinking about this before the podcast this morning in terms of the things that are emanating in the domain in terms of practice and both research. And I think most of us on this panel today have been around long enough that we've seen different shifts over periods of times, which makes it a very exciting, interesting, but challenging space to be in at the minute. And in answer to your question, one of the things that I personally have seen in terms of currently thinking about most when it comes to AI and digital tools, and whether it's my work or in project management practice or project management research or project leadership, one thing that significantly has changed that we've seen with engaging with practice and practitioners and professionals is this subtle but fast and meaningful shift from what we used to think of as a project manager firefighting and going from reactive decision making to this shift to AI and digital tools where we're seeing much more kind of proactive decision making through the use of accessible real-time analytics and predictive modeling. Again, I don't want to spend too much time because we can delve into some of those details as we go through the conversation today. But yes, we're going from reactive to proactive.
Yeah, and it's the great hope, isn't it? It feels to me like a lot of things we've been talking about maybe for 10, 20 years are starting to actually happen, which is great. So thanks for that, Nicholas. David, if we could turn to you.
There was a huge amount of excitement and hype around AI. So ChatGPT was the fastest adopted application in history. So it was kind of really, really exciting in the whole world. And the early articles people were writing were saying something like, this is going to replace, journalists, anybody who writes anything will be going away. And then eventually it started to get taken on in a range of other professions. But I'm sort of thinking at the moment in terms of AI that we're sort of coming down in the hype cycle. We're sort of getting down to that sort of, actually, this isn't transforming quite everything in the way that we thought it would. I mean, MIT published a report recently where they did a huge amount of data collection and they said 95% of pilot projects are failing. I mean, this is about presumably setting high objectives in your projects, which, I'm guessing is the subject of a different podcast. But yeah, this is what I'm thinking at the moment, is we're sort of coming down in the hype cycle. There are lots of people making lots of good use of AI, but normally in a kind of focused way. If you say, well, we'll just sort of throw AI at it, this is not having transformational effects. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of right now.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you say that it's like subject of a separate podcast, but it is intrinsically linked because there's no point in doing this if it's not going to have some success. And I think that MIT study was a bit of an eye opener actually, because it made people realize this isn't something you can just throw money at. It needs to be a bit more deliberate with the training and with the way you go around it. And maybe I'm saying to a lot of people now, the tech's only 49% of the issue, and at least 51% is the culture change and how we go about it. So I think we'll touch on that a lot more as we go through this podcast. We'll stick with the theme actually. Anything in particular that either David or Nicholas hasn't said
Okay, so overall about AI, I think one thing I've been giving some thought into is, how it affects my work at
Mm.
university in terms of research and education. In terms of education, how we prepare the students and how we deal with the issue we encounter that students use AI ChatGPT to do their work, how we take care of that as educators. About research as a early career researcher in the team, I'm thinking more about what opportunities does this exciting new development in technology can bring to me, to us, to the academia. So that's what I've been thinking about AI generally. About project management, I think, well, as we'll touch on more later on when we talk about the report, is we've seen lots of attempts or experiments with AI in the project management profession. But so far, I think we're still quite far away from getting a conclusive argument on whether AI is ready. Well, the reason we don't have a conclusive argument is that AI is a new thing. People are still trying it out. There are lots of exciting pioneering of using the tool, but we are all exploring.
Yes,
So that's why it's fascinating. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's one point of view.
it is. Yeah, and David's point about the hype cycle, I think
Mm.
we're on the very familiar journey, aren't we? We've reached the top. There's going to be the trough of disillusionment, and we will go back up again. But I think the only difference is it might happen a lot faster than a lot of other cycles.
Okay, so we'll dive a bit more into the report now. So, Nicholas, what questions did the report set out to answer without revealing the full report?
So I think the report really came at a point in time where, let's say, if we think back 3 years ago in terms of how we were going in from this shiny new tool that a lot of project professionals were looking at, and there was this AI curiosity. We weren't quite sure what it was, and some novel ideas kind of emerged out of that. But as we've discussed, this, it's cyclical. There's some waves that are going through this particular process, and I think that the challenge that we had as a community, as a project management community, is where's the proof in the pudding, and where's the
Mm.
empirical evidence to actually demonstrate that any of these shiny new tools or toys are actually of any use to the project profession, and how can we capitalize on those? So I think for us as a research team working alongside the Association for Project Management, it was really important to take a critical look at this space. And we wanted to have a look also in terms of what, if any, differences were between, say, the public sector types of projects in AI and digital and private sector, and whether there was any overlap in our opportunities to learn from each other. So in answer to your question, the primary focus of the research was really to try and understand how digital transformation not only affects the methods, but also the skills for project delivery in what we termed as the emerging AI economy, which we experienced in over the last 3 or 4 years.
Was there anything that surprised you about the report?
So one of the things that really kind of surprised, there were actually a number of things that actually surprised us, and the validity of the empirical data, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But one of the things that actually surprised us was that, if I remember correctly, I think it was around 35 or 38% of project professionals discussed that AI had a positive impact in terms of reducing costs,
That's interesting.
despite its widespread adoption. So lots and lots of different organizations are using AI in different types of ways,
Mhm.
but only 35 to 38% of those are actually talking about being able to capitalize that technology to be able to reduce those costs in terms of their projects.
Why do you think that is? Did that get explored in the report at all?
I think it's a combination of things. I think there's a disconnect between, say, how AI is perceived in an organization and how it's implemented. One of the arguments that I've personally made quite frequently is around two key areas. One of them is using the AI because of the sake of just using AI, in terms of, rather than identifying your kind of tension points in your organization or your tension points in your projects, in putting it to effective use. So effectively, what some project organizations or project professionals are doing is, my competition is using AI, therefore I have to use it, without a clear strategy. And I think that's a strategy for failure. And I think that creates problems. The second point is one of the things that's emerged from it, which is seasoned project professionals such as ourselves will be aware of, is the actual quality of the data that goes into the AI. So, the
Rubbish
old
in, rubbish.
adage in terms of garbage in, garbage out. And one of the things that we noticed is that therefore that data governance challenges actually become really, really critical to capitalizing on how AI is used, because our findings suggest that even a small amount of data discrepancy can actually cascade through the project process and through the entire project. And it has this kind of negative ripple effect, if you like. So the
Yeah,
quality of the
yeah.
data is paramount.
And you also mentioned there, David, Nicholas, sorry, that you might see your competitors or other organizations using AI, so you're also kind of forced to use it. So when you have a project where you have multiple different stakeholders, multiple different companies, do you think that adds to the complexity in the implementation of AI? Because you might have differing views across organizations.
So one thing that James touched on earlier is, in answer to your question, is this idea of the kind of like culture transition or culture shift within the organization. You can call these things such as, mindset, whatever it may be. If that's not replicated across the entire chain, as you're saying there, that's where your kind of friction points will emerge throughout the project process. So if everybody's not on board reading from the same hymn sheets or has the same strategic plan or understanding of where the technology actually provides some benefits, that's going to create your tension points. That's going to create your bottlenecks, which ultimately is going to delay what you're trying to achieve as a project, whether it's outcome based, output based, benefit based, whatever it may be.
And if someone was to read just one part of the report, what part would you send them and why?
I'd send them two parts. I'd send them the executive summary at the very beginning, because I think that's a clear cut down abstract of the key findings. And there, somebody will be able to find is the ingredients that are relevant to their particular project at that moment in time. So what we're not arguing is a holistic approach. Here is a ready-made template that is going to be applicable to every single project organization, project process, project professional. There's that critical element, and we all know this, people are the most important part of any project. In your decision-making process, looking at that list of ingredients is going to be incredibly vital. If you then go towards the end of the report, you will also see a digital skills taxonomy, which we developed based on empirical findings and empirical data. That is the bridge to get you to the point where you want to use or how you should use those ingredients. I'm using this kind of metaphor because my family and I are watching the Great British Bake Off at the minute, which is obviously on TV. So it kind of resonates,
Everyone can relate to that.
Yeah, we love watching the Great British Bake Off. So it relates to those types of ingredients and how you mix them together in terms of your end product. So as I said, the key parts would be the executive summary, which gives you the ingredients, but then how do you apply those? If you go to the digital skills taxonomy, you can identify which particular elements are relevant to you and then bridging that gap.
Brilliant.
So just a quick kind of left-wing question out of left field here. So, as AI progresses, we start to see new skills that are also required to be able to drive the implementation and sustain the technology. What sort of new behaviors do you anticipate emerging as AI advances? So let's say we move into physical AI. Human interaction is key within delivering projects because there are so many of us, and that's where decisions kind of stumble. What new behaviors do you see emerging?
So there are some positive behaviors that will emerge, absolutely, but there are also some challenging behaviors that in terms of restructuring work expectations. Let me explain this in just very briefly in some detail. One organization that we spoke to, there were a number of project professionals, and they were using extensively these AI tools. And in fact, our report kind of highlights this, that one of the biggest benefits of using AI tools is the time-saving aspect that it provides project professionals. And I think it was either 65, 68, 70%, but effectively the AI tools improve on-time delivery within projects, which is a huge win given historically how that can be challenging. But one of the challenging things in terms of behaviors, which we're talking about here, is I can do my job quicker and more efficiently. Does that free up more time? What we saw in our research, speaking to project professionals, is the expectation then gets raised. If you can do your job in half the time, I've just been slightly hyperbolic, but I'm making a point here. If you can do your job in half the time, it doesn't necessarily free up time to do other things. The expectation then becomes that the project is at that level all the time. So one particular individual stated, I'm much faster now, but actually I feel the pressure a lot more because I'm asked to work at a much quicker speed all of the time. So that was an interesting challenge.
It's the new baseline.
Perfect. It's the new
Yeah.
baseline. Positive behaviors also. One of the things that we did see is that new entrants, so let's say new entrants to the project profession, are able to challenge more senior colleagues and senior partners in senior thinking, let's say, that I might be accustomed to as a senior project professional, and invigorate with new ideas. So there is that kind of juxtaposition between the new baseline, but also some positive behavioral changes in terms of new entrants having access to tools that enables them to feel more confident in kind of challenging some of the project processes.
Yeah, still very much all emerging, isn't it? David, if we could turn to you, I just want to ask, there's a lot in the press about investment into the UK. There's the UK AI Action Plan, which is starting to be implemented. Does the report challenge any current assumptions about how ready the UK is for AI and digital transformation in general in project management?
I wouldn't think it challenges it. I mean, like the thing that we discovered in looking at AI use was, I mean, Nick mentioned this a little bit, very much that there's a kind of a maturity that you need to have before you can start doing AI, which is just related to digital.
Mm-hmm.
So as a kind of a level of digital maturity that you have when you start your AI project makes a huge difference to how much value you can get from it.
Yeah.
So we talked about data management, the fact that you need to have data in a format that can be understood by a machine if you're going to make use of it in these kind of machine learning kind of contexts. But even with generative AI, the fact that generative AI, if you can use a large language model, you can give it lots of data, and you can say, please help me with understanding project scheduling. Please help me to understand my current state in my project. You can ask generative AI tools, what should I do next as a project manager? And they can give you really good outputs, but only if you're feeding it with the current content. What is it you're doing right now is not necessarily digital for a lot of companies. So if they're already using a structured way of recording everything that's happening, that's digital, that's accessible, everybody can read and everybody can access it, then they're going to get a lot of use out of using an AI tool to interrogate that. But if they're working on paper forms, if they're working on, Word documents that are saved on their own machine that isn't networked, they can't. You can't connect stuff together that is already sort of in separate places. And so there, though, for me, what I'm expecting is the best performing companies before AI came along in terms of understanding their digital assets are going to get much more benefit and much quicker than the companies that were just sort of doing okay or, weren't particularly mature in their sort of digital technology use. So I think that's going to increase the gap between the good performing organizations and everyone else. Just because if you're ready to make use of these productivity tools, you can actually get a lot of benefit from them. But if you weren't ready, then AI doesn't help.
Well, it's interesting, actually. I think it's forced a lot of companies to ask some searching questions about some of the basics, some of the foundations, like you talked about, like what is their data infrastructure look like, and then even down to standard operating procedures, because you need some kind of, defined process to be able to make use of it in the first place. So that's really interesting. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask you about is something that I think a lot of people are grappling with, which is the policymakers and what this means in terms of governance. I've done some work with the RICS, for instance, who have just recently released their standard for how you should use AI. But what do you think policymakers will find uncomfortable about AI generally, or some of the conclusions in your report? Well, what's this underlying issue that I think is tying a lot of them up in knots at the moment?
I mean, there's a lot of sort of hand wringing around the idea that, AI is going to kind of have some Terminator scenario. It will suddenly start writing odd messages to you to say, hey, what's that behind you? And, it's going to be this kind of evil force that takes over the world. I don't see that as a major problem, let's say. But one of the people that we interviewed talked about this issue, and they said that, roughly speaking, you wouldn't allow an individual in a big project organization to just go off and start making decisions without some sort of governance. And in the same way, if AI tools are offering you advice, then you need to apply governance to it. And organizations that are well managed, project governance frameworks exist. They already know how to do this. It doesn't become a new problem. It's just a problem you have to apply to this new technology. For policy, though, again, the sort of the problem I'm seeing isn't so much how do we govern AI. There are frameworks in place, like you say. People are developing rules and guidelines for where you should use it, how you need to understand risky situations where you can't give it decision-making power without, again, applying good governance to it. But for the people in government, their use of AI is going to be enormously challenged by the fact that it's new and different and uncertain. We spoke to lots of people who are working in a government type setting who said approximately, we can't afford to be investing in using AI for our project managers. So the sort of, I mean, in my reading of the interviews, I found a number of kind of paradoxical situations. This I'm calling something like a high stakes paradox. The fact that when you're in a high stakes setting, you can't invest in leading edge technologies because they're risky.
Yeah.
But when you're working in a high stakes setting, it's really important that you're working in the best possible way. But then that's always going to be, slightly new. The leading edge stuff might be better performing, but is always a little bit uncertain. And they're the least able to take on those kinds of technologies. Every single government setting is in that category because of the amount of governance, the amount of attention that's given to what they do. They always ask the question, why did you do it like that? And, how are you going to justify spending the taxpayers' money on this thing that you're doing? So they're really never able to operate like that. So the problem for government is going to be adopting productivity technologies that make them work better when really they can't.
Yeah.
Because they can't justify its use because it's new. So that I see as a sort of as a real challenge, and especially in the public sector, but apparently also in things like aerospace and defence, because they're similarly kind of high stakes, but for different reasons. But also they're struggling. I would have expected high technology companies, big aerospace companies, you'd think, oh, they're going to be all over AI, but they're struggling to get it into their processes because of a slightly different kind of high stakes problem.
It's a bit like Dave Snowden's Cynefin framework, because he mentions when you come into more complex systems, you need to have these safe to fail experiment. And I think in government particularly, there needs to have this room where you could conduct and kind of probe the system to understand what behaviors come out before you kind of commit all of these investments into it. But I guess, like you said, David, they're always under scrutiny and having to justify all their decisions. So it makes it a lot harder. But I guess that rigidity is what might cause a lot of these AI projects to fail.
Yeah.
Because of that risk.
My favorite thing that a government person said in that sort of space is you can get away with a lot if you call it a pilot project.
Yes, absolutely. The definition of a pilot project just got bigger.
Hal, just moving on to some questions for you. And, AI is almost everywhere. It's by default for a lot of companies and even in people using it more personally. But is AI truly improving project? This is kind of a loaded question, but is AI really improving project delivery, or is it just adding a layer of complexity?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say it has to. It's both, because as shown in our report, many experienced practitioners who actually applied AI in their everyday work, day-to-day work, managing projects, they reported, AI has been a great tool, helping them to increase their efficiency and stuff, and hence improving project delivery. But it does add an additional layer of complexity, thinking about how you embrace AI across organization, especially when you are dealing with mega and complex projects where the context is just too complex. Basically, I think the bottom line, to put it this way, is that AI is just a new and cool toy, a new tool. And whether the tool is used for good or it just makes it more complex, it depends on who and how, who's using the tool and how the tool is used.
Yeah, because David, you kind of mentioned it. We're coming into the trough, of the hype cycle, and for me, when I kind of realized when the the buzz kind of tempered a little bit was when people stopped fixating on benchmarks. So we were getting a lot of the benchmark scores which were being crushed by OpenAI and Gemini and Anthropic on MMLU and the Math Olympiads and all these different things. And then it got to a certain point where they were only just improving by fine margins, right? Because it was coming heavily saturated at the top. The problem then is how do you translate those high scoring intelligence AI models to project delivery? Because it's not as simple as saying, this thing can solve complex maths, it can crush natural language tasks, it can do agentic tasks. That bridge between taking those intelligences and saying, okay, yeah, Google are going to perform just as well in a project delivery context is different because of the complexity of a project. Do you guys think that bridge between, especially from academic perspective, that bridge between scoring on a benchmark to a real world application, do you think there is a discrepancy? Do you think it doesn't exactly translate as well?
Can I make some comments? Would that be okay?
Of course.
Okay. So I think this is a good point, and I think we are moving away. So if we think about what you're suggesting here in terms of this idea of benchmarks, and I think early on in this journey, we used to care deeply about what the benchmarks meant in terms of the rankings. Was Gemini top? Was it Claude? Was it ChatGPT? Whatever it may be. And these new entrants. And it kind of gave legitimacy to a number of these tools. I agree with you 100%. I personally have gotten to the stage where the benchmarks are absolutely meaningless, because I think, as somebody who's involved quite deeply in this area, and some of our audience's members will also be, you get a better sense of what tool, the question ultimately is, what tool is right for this purpose or this issue that I'm trying to solve. And I think that becomes intrinsically more important than trying to judge on some benchmarks. So, we've spoken about this idea of like maturity, for instance. So the more your understanding becomes and the more your appreciation and your knowledge becomes in this area, the better sense of what specific tools are of use. Whether benchmarks still serve a purpose, let's say, is new entrants. And it might pinpoint to, okay, well, this seems like a good potential tool. Let's experiment with it. But the point is, the benchmark is not the be end and all of it all. It's essentially, it's a signpost, but you have to make the decisions. If Yoshi, also, if I can go back to, our AI digital tools, the question you asked, really improving project delivery, or is it just adding a layer of complexity? One of the things we mentioned at the very offset of this podcast was, what is the purpose of this report? What is the purpose of this digital transformation and project management report, the DTPM report? And from the onset, we were very clear that we wanted empirical data to uncover the kind of vagueness of what AI might mean for the project community. In two stats that stand out quite dramatically, but within a broader context, is if I have a look at the report, 68% of our respondents say that actually AI tools or digital tools provide better on-time delivery for my projects. And surprisingly, 61% also talk about improved quality. Now, we spoke earlier about the cost-saving aspect of it, and that was quite low. But ultimately, the report does say that if AI is used in the right way, for the right organization, the right project, with the right skills, you could be looking at some tangible benefits in terms of on-time delivery and improved quality. The big caveat with that is that this level of success, let's say, requires both the marrying of technological integration and cultural change. If you discombobulate those two things, you are heading for some troubles. So it's not a silver bullet. It's an objective. It's a strategic objective that organizations with a degree of maturity can reach, as long as the right strategy is applied.
Thanks, Nick. And just kind of keeping in line with that report, Tal, just coming back to how does this report help bridge the gap between high-level digital ambition and frontline operational reality?
I kind of feel that Nick has already answered the question. So this report provides, through the survey and interviews with experienced project professionals, we are presenting our research results from real empirical data, rich empirical data. I think that's how we are contributing to the reality of embracing AI. Another thing to mention is that we are also building a bridge between the academic understanding of AI and the change brought by AI, between the academia and the practitioners. I think that is very important as well. So our report is not only built on summarizing empirical data participants said, but also it comes with academic rigor. And we run, as a first step, we run an in-depth systematic literature review to carefully examine what's the current academic understanding of AI and what it means to project management. So yeah, that is our contribution in a nutshell. And also, as I said as a beginning, I don't think we'd consider this report as a conclusive to this question, but it's more of a beginning.
Yeah.
Where both the academics and the practitioners are at the exploring stage of using AI. I think that is a very important point to keep in mind.
So the question was, how does this report help bridge the gap between high-level digital ambition and frontline operational reality? We kind of answered some of these. But one of the terms we use in the report is, we call it performance measurement gap in the actual report itself. So this is one of our findings. And what's the idea of this performance measurement gap? Well, the idea behind it is that some organizations struggle to translate AI benefits into measurable outcomes. And the way we mapped this out, and it's towards the middle to the end of the actual report itself, and this is the bit that David and I worked on quite well, and David kind of challenged some of the preconceptions. So we came up with this, we initiated this digital project management tools matrix. Within that particular matrix, which we had lots of discussions around, we demonstrate that our empirical findings show that most organizations are stuck in one of the lower quadrants, so the low business process change quadrant. So effectively not capitalizing on AI. So the ambition is there. Some of the organizations are reaching the 68 and 61%. But if you fall within the performance measurement gap, which is where we find a lot of organizations, you're going to struggle to translate AI into benefits into measurable outcomes. David, do you remember some of the conversations we had around that? And if you can jump in there.
Yeah, we did talk about, well, I mean, we've got on in our report this business process change against kind of data integration. And then we map various tools against that. And the AI and AI tools is in the high business process change, high data integration quadrant. Both things kind of are needed as a result of that implementation. If I can talk briefly about the benchmarks that Yoshi, you said, we're not so much focused on the benchmarks anymore. If we say ChatGPT came out in November 22, we're nearly 3 years past that. Not long after that, I did a small-scale research project where we roughly asked the question, can ChatGPT get an MBA? And the answer was yes. We got a computer science student and we gave them assessments from 10 different modules, and we said, write a response to these assessments. They had no business training in particular, but they did have some computer science skills, which helped. But it scored like a kind of a high pass. It didn't quite make a merit level, but on average, very definitely can get an MBA. And that was, 2 years ago now. The kind of the standard, that's definitely a useful standard. If I can write outputs where I can get a master's degree, that's a useful level. But then where we come in now, if I'm going to be told, go run a project, here are the project objectives, which is, I'm going to say, probably quite common. The project objectives are given to the project manager rather than they're involved in actually deciding what they should be. And so they're told, here's what you've got to do, go and do it. They don't have the remit to change how the organization operates. And so with these tools, with their capabilities, where you actually need to change how the organization operates and you need to change its underlying approaches to managing data, and you need to build a sort of a suite of tools, which probably are going to be sort of, you're going to buy institutional licenses possibly for some of these things. You're going to have to start thinking about which country are these servers hosted in, if you've got any sorts of sensitive data, who gets this data that I upload back into the model. This was a conversation we had with loads of practitioners. They said, we can't give our data to ChatGPT. It isn't secure. That doesn't meet our data governance needs. It would be, it's not GDPR compliant. But even so, I'm going to use a basic chatbot. Is about the level you can get to if you're just told, here's a project, go do it. If you're told at a sort of very senior level, if you've got a chief data officer, they're probably all over this. If you don't have a chief AI officer, which I'm going to say is, who has a chief AI officer, then you're not in a place to say, in this project, I'm also going to radically transform how we manage project data, how we organize projects, which tools we use, and so on. So that sort of need for huge business process change is brought by the kind of capabilities of the tools. So that sort of affordance, let's say, is a problem because you can't actually get the best out of it unless you transform yourself. And that's, I suppose, difficult. And maybe that's partly why the kind of benefits we're seeing from AI use are quite gradual, because that's you need to change how you're organized in order to make best use of them.
Yeah, and this is why
Yeah.
I think it's really important because we can drive top-down change and prescribe business processes, but I think the idea of emergent behaviors is so important because if you limit someone's capability to use a tool and they can't use it, well, you're going to get shadow systems that are forming whether you like it or not within a business. And I think, and then how you manage that again across government becomes a lot more stringent. But that does happen. So I guess that kind of link between digital strategy to operational reality is quite murky in that sense because not everyone follows the same.
And I think the reality is sometimes you've got to take a few steps back to move forward. Like there's the low-hanging fruit, the things that you can do quite simply with AI, but to get the real benefit from it, sometimes you've got to take that long, harder look at, whether it's yourself or your organization in terms of the way that you're governing your data, the way that you've gone around your operating procedures and things like that. So I think it's a positive thing, but that's probably why we've hit that kind of the top of the hype cycle at the moment. And there'll be a short period of time when people get their ducks in a row, if you like, before we get the next wave. Well, that's a great hope. The other great hope, and this is turning to you, Nicholas, is what I'm hearing more and more from people is actually one of the big benefits from AI is around how it can reshape people and reshape our roles and what we do and our mindset. And I'm quite encouraged by the fact that one of the promises is that if we get back more time, we can spend that time on human skills, communications, empathy, the way that we actually communicate at the end of the day with clients and other consultants to make the job better. So, does the report say anything about that, about changes in people's mindsets? And do you think the industry is ready for the speed of transformation that that AI is driving?
I think this is interesting, and I might say something slightly controversial. I have an issue.
We like a bit of controversy.
I have an issue, and I'm sure a lot of people will relate to this. I have an issue with this idea of reshaping people at exponential speeds. Let's say, for example, I don't know if any of you have ever, run a business or tried to change the organizational culture or things like that. Resistance to change is quite profound. It can take an incredibly long time to change the cultural environment, to change the organizational environment within a company, and to get your employees, your project managers, to think differently and adopt new approaches. So the speed at which reshaping people for me is slightly challenging. Let's say I'm not sure I actually agree with those types of arguments. Certainly, the speed in terms of which the tools are becoming much more prominent is interesting, I would say. Reshaping people in itself, quite something that possibly requires more focus, let's say, for example. Because one of the things that certainly in our report we talk about is the idea of project leadership. And in fact, if I remember correctly, one of the interviewers said specifically, and I think we use this quote in the report, ultimately projects are run by people, not by tools or data. So if you're talking about this idea of reshaping, it has to come from this idea of communal or collaborative leadership. What is the strategic vision? Where are we taking us? Reshaping organization is incredibly tricky, even when you know that your current business approach, your current project approach is destined for failure. If we think about legacy organizations, Blockbusters is a perfect example. Their kind of business model in terms of what they were engaged in with DVDs and VHS and so on and so forth. And new entrants like Netflix came along and obviously kind of disrupted the area. Blockbusters could see what the changes that they had to implement, but were just not able to embed those because it was set in a certain configuration. So the speed at which we're reshaping people is can be quite challenging without the right project leadership. Also, in answer to your question, the thing we used to think about was, who is the best person for this project? Is it somebody who's got a high degree of technical knowledge, or is it somebody who's got excellent power skills slash soft skills, for example? I think where we are emerging, let's say, is this hybrid where you increasingly will require project professionals with a hybrid approach to blending technical and interpersonal skills that marry those two things. I think ultimately you will fail if you just focus on one or the other.
Yeah, it has to be both, absolutely. And I think the blockbuster analogy is great, actually, because there's so many lessons you can learn from it. And that goes to very similar to what we were talking about, because, of course, they made some catastrophic business decisions. They had the opportunity to buy Netflix and pivot. And I think there's a similar risk within project delivery, because whilst you say that we can't force fast change on people, which I do agree with, it's a bit of a tightrope. At the same time, if we don't change ourselves, then there may be another like a version of Netflix come along that disrupts the industry for us. So it feels like to me we are walking on a tightrope. There's no easy answers. We've just got to make sure we're doing enough to protect our profession, because I do worry, like my overriding worry with all of this is that if we don't get this right, we lose control of our profession from the software companies and the like and the corporates. So it's really important, which is really why we do that, and why things like your report is so important. You raise a good point, Hal, about, actually this is empirical data that you've got. There's so much hearsay and there's so many opinions, but what we actually need is real world data, which is why I really encourage everyone to read the report. Before we kind of finish off, just a few kind of quick fire questions before I'm going to ask each of you to sort of sum up the future of project management with AI at the center of it. But if I could just, this is for anyone really, whoever wants to chime in, just your kind of quick opinion is, what's maybe the one uncomfortable truth within the report that, or maybe that the report hints at but doesn't quite say out loud? Does anyone want to have a go at that?
I mean, at the moment, I'm going through our data again because we're academics. We need to write academic journal papers as well. And so, like you say, it hints at this, but doesn't necessarily get to it. So this idea about, we talked about skills and productivity. The productivity difficulty, like classically, person who's good with people skills person isn't the techie.
Mm-hmm.
The techie isn't all that skilled with people. That's a sort of a classic idea. And then Nick was alluding to this idea of project managers now needing to have both of these capabilities. So to have, like, a lot of people use this expression of grunt work. I can use AI, it can take away the grunt work, and so then I can focus on what really matters, which is people. But in order to get to that point where AI can take away the grunt work, you need quite a lot of AI skills. And so to become somebody who can focus on people, I need to be technologically skilled. That seemed to me as a bit of a tricky line. But within that as well, another thing that I'm sort of starting to see is this idea about a kind of a well-being paradox. If I can have AI help me and it can take away some of these jobs which are causing me difficulty and stress, then Nick mentioned productivity, more is expected of me. And then I've got this kind of back of my mind sense of, actually, this AI is really helpful. It's doing loads of work. Surely people aren't going to be employed anymore in the same way. So we're stressed by AI when we're using it. Hey, isn't this great? Is also sort of, oh no, this is great.
Yeah.
And so these things are sort of coming along at the same time. It's sort of, it really helps you, but that stresses you out for the future. And in order to focus on people, you need technical skills. It's conflicting. It's paradoxical.
I'd also argue to that as well, David, on your point around a paradox. We have to, build a level of AI literacy so we can use the AI effectively, and then we need to translate what we get from that to a human. Now, there is, this impending AI mania that people are getting. People are getting too accustomed to using AI, and they start to speak to other people as if they're speaking to an AI. So you actually then diminish your social skills because you're conversing with one more than the other. So, these incumbents are trying to make these technologies so they're even more human-like, so they resonate even more. But then to go back to Nicholas's point around people trying to push back against change, trying to resist change, well, there could be some behavioral engineering happening through an AI which you don't actually realize. So you write in certain ways. You'll use things like M dashes when you're writing text because you don't want to use commas too much.
Yeah.
And so there's a convoluted dynamic in balancing all of this. And I don't think the tech companies have got it right because there are issues everywhere. And I think, again, when people apply it within their projects, need to be more cognizant of all of those complex behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely changing the way we are. Your mobile phone now becomes part of your memory that you used to have. And then in the same way, generative AI is going to take away some of our skills. It kind of diminishes your capability to do certain kinds of thinking because you're outsourcing it every time. So you then no longer have those skills. That in a sort of, in some environments becomes, what's this called? The automation, the irony of automation was written about in the 1980s. If you automate manufacturing equipment, then the operator becomes much more important. They're not involved as much because the machine is automated. It's mostly doing its own thing. But when it stops, when it breaks, when it starts acting in an odd way, it's really expensive and it's got an enormously high output. So you need an operator who's there and really able to fix it very quickly. And in the same way with AI as automation, with AI support, the operator of the machine becomes really, really important. But their capability to do it goes down because they don't have to intervene as often. So that's in the manufacturing setting. And so we're doing the same thing. We're not actually applying that thinking anymore. We're having AI do it mostly. And so, like, who is it eventually that's going to be checking the output of our AI tools? Because nobody's doing it anymore. And that eventually becomes tricky.
I guess very scary. And eventually, do we just trust it? This is what happens with a lot of technology. In the end, you just start handing it off. You don't think that you need to check the outputs. But there was a study done, I can't remember where I saw it, but recently, where it actually showed that there's areas of the brain that are starting to, it's not developing as much because we're not using those kind of abilities. So it's really interesting. I think a lot of it will emerge over time.
So in just building on that, in terms of one uncomfortable truth is, you've touched on that briefly, but for me, the two words are going to be trust and accountability. So first of all, am I trusting the information that's been given to me? Am I trusting the decisions that it's suggesting I should follow? And I think those of us who have built up that critical knowledge prior to AI and are in a better position to be able to critically challenge the information that is being presented in front of us because we have the knowledge, the expertise, and information prior to AI. New entrants who will have known, so for example, my children who will eventually join the workplace and AI will be embedded, may not benefit from those opportunities to critically challenge the information. So I think trust is a big kind of issue that we need to grapple with. And accountability, when things go wrong, who is accountable?
Yeah.
Is it the artificial intelligence? Is it the project manager? Is it the project professional? Is it the project leader? Is it the organization? So I think for me, the uncomfortable truths are going to be around trust and accountability.
And I still always go back, at least for the moment, to the bookending approach of human at the beginning, algorithm in the middle, human at the end. I think that still holds so true. Obviously, at some point, the agents are going to be better than us, so we'll have to change that that arrangement. But for now, I always say to people, just use that, and it's going to be very hard, to go too wrong because you're still taking accountability. Can I just before we wrap up, could I ask each of you just to, in one word, or maybe just one sentence, how would you describe the future project management with AI at the center of it? Do you want to go first, Nicholas? Then we'll go to Hal and then David.
Sure. So in one word, for me, the future is hybrid. I think a lot of what we're talking about here today, in terms of a lot of discussions around our report, it's not a one size fits all. It's going to be a multitude of different approaches. So I think for me, the one word is going to be a hybrid approach.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nicholas. Hal?
I would say it's just exciting thinking about exciting opportunities and not really challenges, probably more changes to the profession and to society. And I don't think project managers will be replaced by AI. So fingers crossed.
At least for now.
Yeah.
Thanks, Hal. And David?
I'd say changing. The thing that project management is now is Nick used this hybrid expression. We're currently in a place where we're adopting AI and it's making us a little bit different. As we go forward, what a project manager will be quite different in terms of they have different capabilities, they rely on different methods, they're in potentially different places. The way it runs will be different, and in some ways that we haven't seen yet. Yeah, changing.
Excellent. I think we got some really good words there, and that hopefully help us with the title of the podcast as well, Yoshi. So all that remains to be said, really, there's actually a couple of things. I just firstly just want to say thank you guys for the research and the work you put into this report. It was much needed, like I say, to actually get some empirical evidence that goes with a lot of the hearsay. So, from me and from everyone really at Project Flux, thank you so much. And I'm sure all of our listeners are going to be really, really interested to read some more, which takes me to my second point, which is where we are going to put it in the show notes. We are going to put it in the links. But if people want to find out a bit more, where can people find out a bit more about the report?
The report's public. It's available on the APM website. If you search, if you can get in a whole Google search of digital transformation and the AI imperative in public and private sector projects.
Yeah.
Or if you write AI project management APM, you'll find a PDF version of our report.
Excellent. But we will put it in the show notes for everyone, so you should be able to click straight through. And then hopefully, I assume, like you have all kind of alluded to, we're at the very beginning of a journey. So no doubt there'll be further research to happen in the future. And we'll all be very much looking forward to that. So all that remains to be said is thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the research that you've done in this area. And thank you for a really, really interesting chat to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Project Flux is here.
Just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Construct AI. For anyone interested in looking at Construct AI, the link's in our show notes. There's a free tier that you can play around with. Yoshi and I have been using it for a good year since it was originally launched, and we get a huge amount of value out of it. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to go onto the Construct AI site and have a play around.
Cool. And guys, before we sign off, please don't forget to share, follow, and like all of our stuff. So that helps us to engage with you and understand a bit more about what you want so we can bring it to your doorstep as early as possible.
See you later, everyone.